It is quite apparent, Vallasia addressed the council, making sure that her numerous head tentacles were flowing naturally towards her back, as if she were swimming with the current in a swiftly moving river. She took a deep breath and did her best to remain calm and confident in what she was about to say. Appearances were everything when addressing the venerable women that ruled over the city of Ploria when Queen Isaral was away on campaign. That what our great city of Ploria has, is a guardian star. That is ridiculous, child, Shirhani spoke at once, her head tentacles slithering every which way, displaying her annoyance. Vallasia knew she'd be the first to dismiss her claims. One of the oldest members of the council, Shirhani was like a rock facing the tides, unrelenting and immovable. We know the stories. The signs that the goddesses have sent us in the past, during times of need or indecision. Large stars visible during the day, cutting wide strokes of light like a painter's brush on clay, moving deliberately through the gate of heaven. The light over Ploria is neither large nor moving. Which is why I chose my words carefully, Shirhani, Vallasia replied coolly as she turned to face her in the marble council chamber. I did not infer that the light over Ploria is a sign from the goddesses, or that it was even sent by the goddesses. What I am saying, is that the star is always visible, day or night. It also does not move, remaining firmly above the palace in Ploria. It is not large, not like the signs of old. It is the same size as all the other stars at night. Hence, it is something we have not seen before, something the gods have not done before. Something new that has to be given a name. Therefore, I claim it to be a guardian star. Stars are in the domain of the heavenly realm, Fleckorth said simply. She was always a staunch traditionalist. Goddesses forbid if she actually had to embrace something new. There is no precedent for this, for something new. How can this be? The heavenly realm has been and always will be, new just does not happen. It must be a trick, Perilous said immediately. She was always concerned with the well-being of the realm and its defense. More often than not, that included going to war to maintain the realm's safety. Perhaps it is some trick with mirrors. Something those crafty Locrans created. They have hated us for centuries. I bet they are behind this. Perhaps Vallasia has an answer to what this guardian star is and its possible meaning, Ballura interrupted. Ballura was always the level-headed one. Wanting to hear out any argument fully before coming to a decision. The fact that she was Vallasia's aunt had nothing to do with it. Probably. I implore the council to give her the floor to explain herself. Thank you, Ballura, Vallasia said, bowing her head slightly towards her. She took that brief moment to look over her tunic, making sure it was still presentable and unwrinkled. Finding it satisfactory, she continued. Since I highly doubt that the Locrans could even conceive of something like this, it is safe to say they are not behind it. And, as written in the sacred texts, our ancestors took great care to write about every celestial sign they witnessed. Because this has not been seen before, it is either something new from the goddesses, or it is not of the goddesses. At the moment, it does not appear malevolent. Otherwise disaster would surely rain down upon Ploria. I would like to give it the benefit of the doubt and claim it to be benevolent. But what is apparent, is that there is much we do not know. Currently, for all I know, this could be the birth of a new goddess. Nonsense, Shirhani said. It could simply be a new star, that is all. Vallasia is just spouting any idea that comes to mind, hoping something sticks. Typical of the third in line for the throne. They always have to discover something new to remain relevant, for the throne will never be theirs. Vallasia would be the first to tell someone that she was a scholar first, and a warrior second. The fact that she was royalty would be among the last things she would tell a person, if it even came up. That Shirhani would instantly assume that she was doing this merely for fame or glory cut deep to her second heart. Her head tentacles started to spread in an obvious show of anger before she shook her head and calmed herself once again. A new star that does not move even as the night progresses? Vallasia asked quizzically. All stars move except the northern star. It is a more likely answer than the birth of new goddess. Shirhani replied dismissively. Leave this matter to the priestesses. The birth of goddesses has only happened once anyways, when the first waves crashed upon the shore, Fleckworth explained. When that occurred, the gates of heaven shone like the sun, and night was banished from the world for a lunar cycle. The gates of heaven are not currently shining, and night almost upon us. I highly doubt the birth of a new goddess is on the horizon. It could very well just be a new star, as much as I hate to say it. Regardless, I was merely stating my openness to any and all theories that could explain this star, Vallasia said boldly. Which is what makes me the perfect woman to lead the investigation into it and discover its secrets. Rest assured, no matter what theory ends up being true or what new discoveries I make, I will not hide anything from the council. Well, she has plainly made her case, Ballura said. The truth of the matter is that there is much unknown about this new celestial event, what it is or what it intends. I say we give full investigative authority to Vallasia so she can further delve into these mysteries and deliver her findings to us. Those in favor? A number of hands went up, not all of them. Full investigative authority meant a budget. She truly would be able to spend her time delving into this mystery. Any opposed? No hands went up. Shirhani did take the opportunity to sneer at Vallasia before looking elsewhere. Vallasia shrugged mentally. A reef fish never changes its stripes. It is decided then. Vallasia shall be the guardian of the guardian star. With that, Ballura smacked her brass gavel against her marble desk, considering the matter settled. It wasn't the first time Vallasia found herself looking up in the sky, staring at the ever-present, immobile star above Ploria. But it was the first time that it actually hurt. Ah, come on, that was way too easy. Kaliva said, soon coming into Vallasia's field of vision, staring down at her. She was smiling, but the smile was slowly fading as she extended her hand out to Vallasia. You usually last more than a few seconds. Vallasia sighed and took Kaliva's hand, soon getting to her feet. Kaliva started to dust her off. You were thinking about it again, Kaliva stated very matter-of-factly. You know you can ill afford to do that in combat. I know that, Eva. Vallasia snapped. I just dash. Kaliva immediately cast down her eyes and her head tentacles in a sign of deference. It is not my place to tell my lady what to do or what not to do. Vallasia sighed and threw a punch at Eva's shoulder. Come now, we're past that and you know it. Eva merely laughed. Well, I had to at least try to get your mind off that blasted thing. It has been, what, 7 lunar cycles? Nothing has changed. Let not your mind be troubled by it. It has to be there for a reason. But that reason eludes me. Vallasia exclaimed, kicking the sand beneath her feet. And I have searched the texts. Countless texts. Old scrolls. Scripture and non-scripture. History, stories, plays, anything I could get my hands on and nothing. Eva shrugged as she picked up Vala's brass spear from the ground, handing it back to her. So it is completely new. We do have more pressing matters to attend to at the moment. Queen Isaral and your sister, Isai, are out on the front lines against the coming Lochran incursion. Please, as if the Lochran, of all people, are any threat to us Plorians, Vallasia said dismissively as she grabbed her spear. If, Kaliva continued. Goddesses forbid, something were to happen to them, we have to be ready to fight for our lives against the Lochran. Last we heard, they had gathered in numbers we have never seen before. And with Isakala ruling from the palace, it is up to me to lead the defenders and protect Ploria. Vallasia finished the sentence for her with the practiced air of someone who has heard it numerous times before. Keep this up, Eva, and I might just start calling you, Mother. Eva stumbled back, her hand clutching her chest where her second heart would be in obvious mockery. Ah! You wound me, Vala. I hope to be dead and sunken before you compare me to her. There was a moment of hesitation, before both women burst out in laughter, patting each other on the back. Ah, Eva, but you can hardly expect me to take the Locrans seriously, can you? They are barbarians, after all. How many times have we and our ancestors beaten them? It was at this time, that the ever-present star above Ploria, a source of consternation and many a sleepless night for Vallasia, shone a brilliant orange. Brilliant and bright that it outshone the sun. So bright and vivid that Vallasia had to look away lest her unworthy eyes burned in their sockets. Then just as soon as it happened, the flash was gone, and so was the star. It disappeared, Vallasia simply stated, a look of incredulity covering her face. Why in the world would it be gone now of all times? What has changed? At that moment, a horn sounded out among the city walls. Then another, and a third. Vallasia's head tentacles twisted up with themselves. She knew what the horns meant. Their forces had met defeat in battle, and now the enemies were fast approaching the city. A siege was imminent. And with no army, that also meant the survival of their people depended on the outcome of that siege. Eva and Vala looked at each other worryingly. This could be the end of Ploria's story, Kaliva said with Vallasia nodding in grim agreement. Did we grow too complacent? We might have to make deals that we do not like just to ensure that Ploria survives. How many of our people will need to be given away into slavery? Will the Locrans even accept that? They have hated us for so long they may just want to get rid of us for good. Vallasia didn't know the answer. Her mind was numb, the Locrans were knocking at their door. Her mother and sister were surely dead, they wouldn't have suffered the dishonor of being the first Plorians to lose to the Locrans in over 10 generations. They gathered themselves and their equipment. There was no time for worrying. Morning would come later, the lives of those who yet live were their responsibility. But just as they were about to leave the training yard, another light appeared in the sky that started off as a dull orange but soon glowed larger and brighter. Wait, that is a sign from the gods. It has to be. Vallasia said excitedly as she pointed at the light with her spear. It is just as described in the sacred texts. A large star cutting a swath of light through the sky. Wait, but it is not heading towards the gate of heaven, Kaliva observed. It looks like it is heading towards the Anrath Mountains. Vallasia looked over the light and its path. It indeed seemed to be heading right for the Anrath Mountains to the south. After a brief moment, a dawning realization came to her. It is not just a sign. It has to be help. Coming down from the heavens to aid us in our dire time of need. It could be a relic, or sacred armor, or a weapon, or maybe even a goddess. What? What are you talking about? Eva placed her hands on Vala's shoulders and shook her gaze away from the falling star. Do you understand what you are saying? The goddesses abandoned the realm, leaving it to us mortals. They vowed never to step foot on the shores of creation ever again. Everything we do on this realm is of our own accord. What reward we receive in the afterlife is based on our own merit and actions. They only guide, they never interfere. Vallasia placed her hand on Kaliva's shoulder. Kaliva, I have to go, and I have to go now before the city is surrounded. Wherever that star lands, I know it will be the salvation of Ploria. I know reasoning will not sway you. But this has to be the reason that star was there in the first place. I have to go. But the city needs you. You have to lead the defense. Captain Kaliva, I entrust the city's defense to you. You have my full and utmost confidence in your abilities. Vallasia said as she reached into her satchel and pulled out a small, red coral medallion, granting her full command of the city's defenses. Lead well. Make no deals of slavery or surrender. Hold out until I return, with salvation riding on my shoulders. I promise you that. Kaliva was about to protest, but that look in Vallasia's eyes convinced her not to. She could see that Vala, her dear friend, was determined and driven, perhaps for the first time in her life. Instead, all Kaliva could do was salute, her right hand over her first heart, her left hand over her second heart. May Ishla guide your steps and hasten your return. Vallasia returned the salute, slung her shield over her shoulder, and took her leave. Kaliva watched her friend depart with a forlorn look on her face. She was quite certain that this would be the last time she'd ever see her liege. Eventually, the falling star did land in the Anrath Mountains, just as Kaliva predicted. The sizable explosion that occurred after it collided with the range was visible even from the Plorian walls. As Ishavala snuck out of the city, she also noticed a small squadron of the Lokran invaders splitting off and heading towards the mountains as well. Vallasia cursed, they were riding Korans. She'd have to hurry. There was no way in the deep she was going to let those Lokrans get to the goddess first. The journey was harrowing. In her haste, she had neglected to pack enough food for the trip. She ate what she could while traveling, just to keep herself going, but soon enough it didn't matter. Soon, she no longer felt hunger. She only felt the encroaching weight of her people's survival on her shoulders. With each hour that passed, the impending sense of doom only grew. She started traveling through the night, with only the light of the moons to guide her. Through sheer determination and tenacity, she trudged through the thick jungle. She secretly thanked the goddess Lalove that she didn't bring her heavy iron cuirass. It would only slow her down in this environment. She needed to remain light if she was to remain in front of the Lokrans. She constantly thought of what she would say to the goddess once she met her. What prayers she would say, what motions she would take, what deals or promises she would make. She was quite certain that if it came down to it, she would sacrifice her life for her people. Finally, after 4 days of near non-stop journeying, she arrived at the clearing where the star had fallen. It would have taken at least a week if she had traveled normally. She was beyond exhausted. As she approached the edge of the clearing, she realized it wasn't so much a clearing, as a massive hole in the ground. As if an angry giant had punched the ground. Fallen trees and burnt-up plant life littered the sides of the crater. It was at least 3 times as large as the town square in Ploria. And there, what lay in the middle of it, shook Vallasia to her core. It was a small metallic egg. Vallasia had no other way to describe it. It was made of such fine metal that shone like the sun on one side. It was so mirror-like that she could have sworn it was made entirely out of silver. The other side appeared blackened, as if it had been burnt. Falling from heaven must have been quite the ordeal. She slid down the sides of the crater, carefully maintaining her balance as she reached the bottom. It was much larger than she originally thought. It would scarcely fit in the training ground. As she approached, it made a sound. A harrowing sound that made her head tentacles stand on end. But the more she listened to it, it sounded almost like the crashing of waves. A constant crashing of waves upon the shore. Was it trying to soothe her? Remind her of home? Maybe it was reassurance, that her journey was not in vain. She finally reached the metallic egg. It was covered in writing, or at least she assumed it was writing. Writing of the goddesses, no doubt. Was she even worthy to gaze upon it? She wasn't immediately struck down, so she supposed she was safe, for now. She reached out and lightly touched it, and yes, it was metal. And it was incredibly smooth, so smooth that even if the blacksmiths at home polished iron for months, it wouldn't nearly be as smooth as this. It truly was from the heavens, she concluded. But where was the relic? The armor? The weapon? The goddess? If this great metallic egg was indeed like an egg, then perhaps what she needed was inside. But when would it hatch? Soon, she prayed. Or was she supposed to break the egg herself? She lightly drummed her fingers impatiently on side of the egg while she thought, causing resounding metallic sounds to reverberate throughout structure. Much to her shock, she heard a distinctive knocking answer her drumming, followed by more sounds of crashing waves. Cautiously, Vallasia knocked 3 times. 3 more knocks answered her. So there was to be no relic or weapon, but an actual birth of a goddess. Oh, how fortuitous that she arrived when she did. To be able to witness the birth of a goddess was perhaps a once-in-existence event. The knocking from inside, however, did not stop. The sounds of crashing waves did not stop. Instead, the knocking seemed to be moving. She followed the sound, knocking all along the way. The knocking continued to move until she reached a blackened part of the metallic egg. There was an obvious cut into the side, curiously door-shaped. Only instead of hard corners, it had rounded corners. And it was large, far taller than she was. Was this where the goddess would emerge? The goddess would be quite large indeed. She took several steps back and waited. And wait she did. The knocking continued, the sounds of waves continued, but nothing happened. If anything, the waves started getting more intense. More continuous and louder. She eventually noticed there was something very similar to a lever next to the door. But it was not her place to pull it. Vallasia knew that you cannot hurry a hatchling. They hatch on their own time. The same must be true for goddesses. She was busy committing everything to memory. This was truly a momentous occasion and she would tell this story for as long as she lived. But did it truly have to take so long? Would it be considered disrespectful if she snuck a bite to eat? She supposed not. She reached into her satchel and started to eat some dried berries. The sounds of crashing waves stopped for just a moment, before getting even louder than ever before. She put her hands up to her ears before a searing pain struck her shoulder. She cried out as she was tackled to the ground. "Huh, what have we here? A plorian and some weird egg?" said a gruff voice. A sharp pain was pressed into Vallasia's back, keeping her pinned to the dirt. She recognized that language. As she looked back, her deepest fears were realized. She had beaten the Locrans, but only just. They had arrived, and the goddess still hadn't hatched yet. "Spread out, women," the gruff voice called out, coming from the hulking woman that had Vallasia pinned to the ground. "Surround this thing, whatever it is." Other soldiers appeared, soon surrounding the egg, all carrying crude axes and wooden spears. Of course they were barbarians, they barely had any clothing on. And the clothing they did have were barely treated animal leathers, with the head still attached to the skin. Vallasia could feel her warm blood dripping down her shoulder, staining her white tunic a deep shade of blue. "Tell me, Plorian, what is this thing?" "I not Plorian. I am Vallasia," Vallasia said through gritted teeth in a butchering of the Locran language. She soon returned to her own language. "I am the guardian of the guardian star. I will not let you harm it." "Ho ho! Did you say Isa?" The gruff woman soon laughed and called out to the other women. "Hey! We got royalty here." The woman all chortled, Vallasia's mind was racing. How was she going to protect the egg when she was so vastly outnumbered? "Sorry, Your Highness," the gruff woman continued, this time in the Plorian language, much to Vallasia's shock. "You underestimated us Locrans. We learned. We have learned much of your culture and language and tactics. All so we could better eliminate you. You should have seen the bodies of your queen and your sister. They fell on their swords, their guts spilled wastefully on the ground for their failure of not being able to defeat the barbaric Locrans." The gruff woman laughed cruelly, along with the rest of her squadron. Her head tentacles were all spread out and unkempt, she was utterly in control and she knew it. Vallasia's head tentacles were extending and spreading out as blind anger threatened to overtake her. Ah, the gruff woman said as she grabbed one of Vallasia's head tentacles and pulled incredibly hard, plucking it with ease as Vallasia roared in pain. Blood poured from her wound before what was left of her tentacle swelled shut, sealing the wound, but the pain remained. No resisting. "Now, tell me what this metal thing is, before I pull out another one." Vallasia could feel her hearts beat rapidly. She wasn't going to live through this for much longer, she was certain of that. But perhaps she could buy some time until the goddess could hatch. As if to reassure her, the sounds of crashing waves echoed throughout the crater. It is an egg. An egg that will hatch the guardian goddess of Ploria. Goddess? Oh, come off it. The gruff woman replied as she did something that caused shooting pain in Vallasia's shoulder. She cried out again, breathing rapidly and shallowly. She soon realized that the pain she felt earlier was because of an arrow, and the woman was diving it deeper into her. You think this thing is a goddess? Your goddesses do not exist. If they do, they have forsaken you. It is our goddess, Vallasia responded breathlessly. She will protect. She will defeat you. The gruff woman spat on her in the most barbaric way possible. She could feel the heat of the ink, the stickiness of it as it covered her head. Hey chief, one of the women soldiers called out in the Lochran language. We found a lever or something the Plorians like to use to close their gates. Pull it then. Perhaps this goddess of theirs will come out and she can witness the death of one of their rulers. I bet 1/10 of my share of the loot that it's merely another Plorian all dressed up. Vallasia felt the woman get off her and grab her tunic. She was roughly forced to her knees, facing the doorway which she was sure the goddess would emerge from. This was it, they were forcing the hatching. Would the goddess be able to survive? Would it be as powerful as her people needed? Pull it now, the chief ordered. One soldier pulled, but the lever did not budge. She called over another soldier and they both pulled, but still it would not budge. Grunting and groaning, they heaved until finally with a loud metallic clank, like a massive hammer striking an anvil, the lever moved. An incredibly loud hissing sound was heard as air washed all over them, spreading dirt every which way. Say hello to your goddess, the chief growled as Vallasia felt a sharp pain in her back that pierced through to her midsection that took the wind right out of her. She stared down in disbelief at the iron sword, stained with her bright blue blood, that had stabbed her straight through her second heart. The chief pulled her sword out and threw Vallasia to the ground. So this was to be her fate, a slow, painful death. Her first heart could continue her life for a short time, but she'd eventually bleed out. Perhaps she could see the goddess before the depths claimed her. The door did open of its own accord. What or who was opening it, Vallasia couldn't see. Smoke or steam or something similar billowed out of the opening, obscuring her vision. She could hear it, however. It sounded like it was walking, and it sounded so very heavy. With each step it took, the ground trembled. You know, I was having a nice, one-sided conversation with this lady until you dumb pricks decided to torture and stab her right before my eyes. I have to say, that pissed me off. So imagine my delight when you idiots figured out how to pull a lever and inadvertently freed me. There it was. The language of the goddesses. The heavenly language only written about in the sacred texts. Of course she had no idea what the words meant. But if she was being quite honest with herself, it was utterly eerie. It sounded like harsh barks and deep, guttural groans from another realm. If she weren't already mortally wounded, she'd probably be running for her very life. When the smoke cleared, there stood the goddess. She was unlike anything Vallasia had ever seen before in her life. She was fully metallic, shining a bright, brilliant crimson red. And so large, larger than even the largest woman she had ever laid eyes on. She must have been at least 2 heads taller than Vallasia herself. And her head, it was otherworldly. Fully metallic, eyes that always looked like they were constantly furious, and a wide open mouth. Or at least, it had the appearance of being open, but it too was fully metallic. Vallasia was unsure how the goddess was able to speak. In a hazy thought, Vallasia thought that it looked like armor. But she mentally laughed at such a notion. After all, why would a goddess need armor? Regardless, the metal goddess extended an arm towards Vallasia, pointing at her. Don't worry, I'll protect you. Attack dash. The chief started to order before being interrupted. The goddess had already slammed her fist into the soldier closest to the door. The soldier flew back 40 feet before landing with a sickening thud. The soldier's chest had collapsed from the blow as she desperately tried to suck in air that would never come. The other soldier swung her axe at the goddess, who effortlessly caught it in her hands. She grabbed the soldier's arm and squeezed, causing the soldier to scream in agony as her arm was reduced to a mangled, shredded mess. Leaving the soldier, the goddess jumped, leaping up 30 feet into the air, landing with a ground-shaking quake right next to another soldier who let out a piercing war cry. The chief also let out a war cry as she led the Locrans into battle. The scene kept repeating itself again and again like a never-ending nightmare. A soldier attacked with a spear that bounced harmlessly off the goddess. The goddess responded by ripping that soldier's arms off. Another shot arrows at her. She caught one mid-flight and literally threw it back with such force that the soldier's head was split in two. Blood stained the ground, spraying every which way from the force of the goddess' attacks. Some even sprayed all over Vallasia, but she was too delirious to notice. She was edging closer and closer to the gate of heaven. Soon, all that was left was the chief, holding the iron sword still stained with Vallasia's blood. Vallasia could barely see the two, such was her vision swimming and blurring. The chief swung her sword at the goddess, who caught it in her hands and crushed it, splintering it into hundreds of shards. Impossible. The chief said in utter disbelief, uttering her last words. Before the chief could recover, the goddess grabbed her entire midsection and squeezed. The sickening crunch of breaking bones filled the air as blue blood sprayed every which way, staining the crimson metal of the goddess. Dropping the still twitching body into a heap on the floor, the goddess lifted up a large leg and stomped down, shaking up a huge cloud of dirt as the body was soon nothing more than shards of bone and fleshy pulp. Vallasia could scarcely believe it. The falling star was indeed a goddess, come to save Ploria. As she lay there, motionless in a pool of her own blood, she tried to speak, but no words could come. Blood was filling her lungs, her time was almost up. She barely even noticed that her goddess was suddenly in front of her, peering down at her. No longer a bright crimson color, but rather a dull purple. So was the goddess birthed, in the blood of Locrans. You're safe now. With that, the goddess quickly moved back inside the metallic egg. Such a funny thing, really, the egg. Who knew that goddesses were born much the same way that Vallasia herself was born? The rumbling of the ground soon announced that the goddess was back. Ah, don't worry, these should get you right back up in no time. Wait, wrong language. What was it again? Right. Do not worry, you will not die this day. The last bit, she actually understood. Her goddess had deemed her worthy of hearing her voice in her own language. What a wonderful last gift to send her off to the afterlife. She felt a small, piercing pain in her arm, but it seemed so very distant. And Vallasia was so very tired. She could rest now, right? The goddess was free, her people were safe. And as darkness filled her vision, one last thought swam to the forefront of her mind. For a goddess who would be a protector and savior of her people, why did she have to be so utterly terrifying?